Darling, I think often of the first 2 or 3 times that I saw you, how that there was something of great importance to me in my new friendship. There was something that excited me inside. I guess it was just that I half-consciously realized that I had seen the girl that I wanted more than any other I had ever seen. I love you.
I have a new life now. I have many friends. I have new interests, things that I had not even thought of doing before. Also, I found that I have more inner resources than I knew I had. He was always here to open a jar, and I couldn't. And I've not mastered that entirely yet. But I also have a neighbor that helps me if I can't open a jar.
I like my home. I like what I do. I do, my interests, and I'm busy. I don't have to just sit. I've made a lot of acquaintances, and I like the opportunities of doing other things here as you can in Bloomington.
I come to church quite frequently, of course. I'm teaching Bible at times. I think that it's necessary for me to be out into public to really feel my best. That way I push myself and the energy seems to come then and give me the strength that I need. My neighbors say that my car goes in and out of the garage very frequently.
I was born in 1917, which makes me 93 years old, and in 2 months it'll be 94. And I am so grateful that I have lived in this particular period of time. I think it is the best time ever. I have seen more changes than one can imagine. And literally, I was born in the horse and buggy days, literally, because I started school with a horse-drawn school bus, or school hack, they called it, with a stove in it and pulled by 2 horses. In our town, they had a Saturday night band concert, and they had a bandstand in the middle of the street, and so we dressed up and we'd go to town on Saturday nights, and then later we went free movies that they put on the side of a building, and people would go and get their chairs in the afternoon and get a good seat, and we would enjoy Western shows on the side of the building. So I had a good childhood. The night before I left to go to business school, I was reluctant to leave. I loved my community, my church was my church family, and the night before I left, the people were wishing me well, and I was sad and shed a few tears to leave home. I didn't want to go to a big city. And we had a visiting pastor, and he said, "Mildred, I know it would be easier for you to stay home right now, but," he said, "we need people like you to go and make a difference. You go and we will be proud of you."
I was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1924, and my maiden name was Barbara Catherine Jackson. I enrolled in a school called the Catherine Gibbs. Catherine Gibbs is still going strong today, but it was basically they would call it then a secretarial school, but it was, you took liberal arts classes along with typing and shorthand. And if you graduated from there, you had no problem getting a job. Women were needed, the men were in service.
I'm Dorothy Brenton. I was Dorothy Elmore as my maiden name, and I lived in Covington, Indiana when I was born. I moved to Indianapolis after I was married and lived there for 47 years. My dream was being a school teacher because my mother had been a school teacher, and I did not think very much about getting married. In fact, I kept saying I had an aunt that was a school teacher also, and she was an old maid, as they said at the time, and so that was what I thought I wanted to be, was an old maid school teacher. But I changed my opinion after I met my husband. I went to the Subway, which was a little cafe that was down underground, and I wanted a Coke. And in came a gentleman that I had dated and knew, and he brought two brothers with him. They had helped him move into a rooming house, and so he was treating them to a Coke. And he introduced me to them and asked me how I was getting along with my chemistry, because I was having a lot of trouble. So I told him just as bad as I had been getting along before. And so he said, well, these two boys are lab assistants in the chemistry department, so I feel they could help you. And so my husband spoke up and he said, I would be very happy to help you, and when can we get together? And I said, I live across the street. We could go right now if that's suitable. So that's what we did, but we didn't get much chemistry done that day. When he went off to service, it was just sort of expected that I had agreed to be his girlfriend for life, so to speak. And so we wrote every night. He would write me and I would write him. And sometimes the letters would not get through, and maybe I'd have two or three at once and he'd have two or three at once. And so his brother took over the task of walking me to class. That way we could discuss if he got a letter and I didn't, or I got a letter and he didn't. So that way we got acquainted that way.
When I started writing to you, I just wanted to go on and on and on. I sure do appreciate hearing from you, and I can't hear too often either. Yes, I think often of the times we've been together. Truly, they have been numerous for such a short time of acquaintance. Hey, maybe it's love. Yes, that's right. It most certainly is, and it couldn't be better, could it, dear? Again, the sweet words, I love you.
This is the book I made of our wedding after the wedding was over. And it includes the ring cases and my drawing, and then the corsage that I wore. This was our engagement picture. It came out in the paper. And then this was our wedding picture that came out in the paper.
His family sublet my mother and dad's apartment when he was about 7 or 8, and I was 5. He had known my family and my mother and dad from the time, we were children. They were like aunt and uncle. And he was just out of the service and come back from the Philippines. And I came home from New York and my dad worked, and determined to be nice because I didn't care for him very much. He was a tease. And his comment to me was, you've grown up. We went out for dinner that evening and we talked, and he stayed for a few days, and our courtship, so to speak, was long distance because he was living in Ohio, and our families really didn't know that this was going on. We knew it would be fun to see the family's reaction when we told them, because I'm sure they didn't. They didn't expect it. My father-in-law was so surprised because I had a sister, and his first question to Bob, when Bob told him that he was going to get married, and his dad asked him which sister was it. So, you know, that was a family joke. That I certainly never thought I'd end up marrying him. You know, that was the farthest thing.
I met Carlisle unexpectedly at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon in Crawfordsville, Indiana, as he was going from campus. He was a junior in Wabash College. And I'd been warned about those Wabash College boys. And by a chance meeting, we met, and he was different from anyone I'd met, and he wore a suede jacket that looked like it had been slept in, maybe, and he hadn't shaved for 3 or 4 days, I think. But I liked his smile, and I liked his manner, and before it was over, I had agreed to go out with him the next Sunday evening, and I almost canceled it. I thought, what in the world did I do this for? I don't know the man. And here he came, walking. He had a suit and a white shirt and a necktie, and he was shaved, and he was handsome. And I looked out, there was no car. He didn't have a car, but I didn't know that. So he had walked. I figured the evening he'd walked 1.5 miles out to my house. We walked back downtown to go to a movie. It was full, so we said, well, we'll go to the second one. And we walked all evening, and then walked me back home, and then he walked back to the fraternity house. And in that evening, we really became very well acquainted, and never did go to the movie. It was at wartime at that time, and there was so much restlessness and uncertainty. We didn't know if we were going to be involved in it. We married during that critical time with very little. In fact, if I remember correctly, he borrowed money from his dad for us to have a weekend honeymoon in Grand Haven, Michigan. It was an exciting time. We bought our first house, and we paid $900 for a house, an old house, but a nice corner lot that had a little brook running through the corner, and I had great dreams about that house. And I think one of the happiest memories I have was that spring at that little house, and the daffodils that were already there that bloomed, I thought were absolutely beautiful. And Mother's Day, my husband took John David, our little boy, with him to the nursery and bought a little geranium. And so he came, I can see him yet, walking across the yard, him carrying that little pot of geraniums and saying, Happy Mama's Day. We knew each other well. We discussed things. We were able to explore each other's minds and decide what we liked and what we didn't. And we developed over a period of time. And so I think that it was because we shared so much, and he was always so kind. We worked things out together. And I think that's it. I look back, I just don't, I know we didn't always agree on things, but we worked it out, and to both of our satisfactions. And that's what we've tried to do our whole 68 years. We were married 68 years. So.
He had a stroke where I knew it wasn't a bad stroke, but it was enough that I knew something was wrong. And so we went to the hospital there, and he was in the hospital for 3 weeks while they tried to figure out what was taking place. And then they decided that he could have had a very bad stroke.
He called me that morning And he said, I'm not feeling very good and we're just about out of milk. He said, do you think you could get me some milk? And I said, well, I'm not going to the store or any place till I take your blood pressure. And it was normal, of all things. And for some reason, I looked at my watch, and it only took me 10 minutes to go and get the milk and come back. And I called out the minute I opened the kitchen door, and he did not reply. So I rushed and ran just through things and ran to the bedroom, and he was already on the floor and beginning to be blue and cold.
The worst time of my life was when my doctor, his doctor at the hospital, after they had given tests after that last stroke, told me, Mildred, my heart is broken when I have to tell you that he will never be able to be at home again. And that was awful to hear. But he said he has dementia. Besides that, the stroke, he had to be in a wheelchair. I could not manage him here at home. So we lived with that for a year and a day. He was in the health center here.
He asked me one day if I was okay. And I said, yeah, I'm fine, thinking it was, are you okay at the moment? And he was gone in another week. I think he just waited to make sure that everything was fine. And that's sort of the way he was.
So I took a tape recorder with some music and I sat by his bedside and played the music so he could hear it. And they kept telling me he doesn't know anything, but it at least was something that I felt comfortable with. And he passed away very easily then in the hospital.
I didn't know whether he really knew who I was. And I said, Carlisle, you do know who I am. And he said, you're the girl of my dreams. What better gift can you give than that? Yeah.
I couldn't write a poem or a verse that's half so sweet as that you sent my darling. It simply can't be beat, a verse that's half so sweet as that you sent my darling. You see, it so expresses my thoughts and feelings too, that other words are lacking. They simply would not.
Life goes on. Life is good. And you just have to understand, and you don't dwell on it. And there are times yet. I did some things. At first, I got rid of things that were hurting too much. He had a desk that he sat at, and I knew that if I kept that lovely big desk, it was an executive desk, that I would see him there always, because he sat by the hour. So I sold it. I didn't like to eat alone at the place in the table, so I turned the table around another direction and put the radio there so I wouldn't have to look at an empty space. I tried to develop new interests. I went ahead with my life, and there are times that I'm lonely, of course, and I always will be, but I cannot say that you ever get over. There's always that empty spot, but that's the way it is. Yeah. On the other hand, I find that I have a life that I've never had before. Always, I lived with my family, of course. Then I was married, and you have somebody else to consider, and you have certain limitations as to what you can do without consulting each other. You know, I'm a quilter, and sometimes I turn my kitchen into a quilt shop, and I use my counters to cut, and I don't have to put my ironing board and my sewing machine away because I'm the only one here. The first one I did, I made for my son and his wife for Christmas. And the next day, my son called me and he said, "Mom, that is the warmest quilt I've ever slept under." And I said, "Well, you know why? It was made with love."
I think church work had always been a great portion of my life. And so you base your beliefs and your feelings on knowing that the Lord is there for you. And so I think that's a good portion of it. This has been 17 years now since my husband passed away. So I have created a life that probably enfolds my daughter and granddaughter and grandchildren more than anything else at this time. The young grandchildren are quite inspirational because, of course, you see them change every day. And since I get to see them quite frequently, it makes it very interesting for me to see the growth, the difference in their daily lives and what they care about and so forth. You see characteristics that you think, oh, that was like their dad or their grandfather did or something like this. And many times just a glance or something will remind you.
It was always very evident to me that they cared so deeply for each other. Just the way they would joke and laugh with each other and how they treated and respected each other. And it passed these things on down to my mom, which then showed in her marriage, which then gave me a good example of what a good, strong marriage is like. So.
We had talked over what would happen if either of us passed away. We each had said we'd like for the other to marry so that they would have companionship, and yet we each said we wouldn't want to.
I never dwelt on sad times. Things happen. If they happen for a reason, you deal with it and you close the door and move on. And that's the way Bob and I were. And it just seemed natural, I guess. I just knew whatever decision I made about my life and where it was going to take me, I would not be making that decision by myself, and somehow I always have known that it's what Bob and I would have done together. I think love is enjoying someone's company, trusting them, being able to talk to them, working as a team and not having it all one way. It never occurred to me that my life wouldn't always be with Bob. If I do something or think I'm going to do something that I don't think he would really approve of, and I'd have to work at making him think it's okay, then I still have that feeling. And it's sort of funny.
What would I do with Carlisle if he were here right now? Well, we love our home. And I can't think of any exotic place I'd want to go. But I have fond memories of him sitting in his wing chair, reading the newspaper or a book, and quietly back in the sunroom. And I think what I would do that would bring him as much pleasure as anything would be to bring him a warm cookie on a napkin. And I was thrilled every time I did this, and I did it innumerable times. But each time he was so gracious, and he acted like it was the biggest gift anybody could give. And he'd say, "Oh, well, thank you." And I can't think of anything that I would get any more pleasure out of than to give him a warm cookie.
And I certainly feel lonesome when you're not around. But it is a happy, beautiful lonesomeness, full of sweet memories and great anticipations. Wishing you sweet dreams to the sweetest of all, your own Norman.
I couldn't write a poem or a verse that's half so sweet as that you sent my darling. It simply can't be beat, a verse that's half so sweet as that you sent my darling. You see, it so expresses my thoughts and feelings too, that other words are lacking. They simply would not do, my thoughts and feelings too, that other words are lacking.